The brass casings hit the concrete floor like scattered rain, each metallic ping echoing through the indoor shooting range at Precision Point Training Center. Elena Vasquez moved methodically along the back wall, her worn work boots crunching over the spent shells as she swept them into neat piles. The acrid smell of gunpowder hung thick in the air, mixing with the industrial disinfectant she'd used to clean the shooting lanes earlier that morning. It was 6:47 a.m., and the range wouldn't open to the public for another hour and 13 minutes. She preferred these quiet moments before the chaos began. Before the weekend warriors arrived with their shiny new firearms and loud voices, before the police officers came for their mandatory qualification rounds, before the competitive shooters claimed their favorite lanes and filled the air with the sharp crack of precision rifles. In these stolen minutes of dawn silence, Elena could almost pretend she was somewhere else entirely. The cleaning cart's wheels squeaked as she maneuvered it around lane 12, where yesterday's high-volume training session had left particularly stubborn powder residue on the concrete barriers. She'd been working at Precision Point for 8 months now, ever since she'd answered the help wanted ad taped to the window of Murphy's hardware store. The job posting had been simple: range, maintenance needed, early hours, attention to detail required, military experience preferred, but not necessary. Elena had torn the number off the bottom of the flyer with trembling fingers. Now, as she scrubbed it at a particularly stubborn stain, her sleeve rode up slightly, revealing the edge of a tattoo that disappeared beneath the fabric of her long-sleeved work shirt. The design was partially visible, the bottom portion of what appeared to be a military insignia, though she was careful to keep it covered. Always covered. The range's owner, Dave Morrison, pushed through the heavy steel door that separated the shooting bays from the front office. His coffee mug bore the faded logo of the 82nd Airborne, and his gray beard couldn't quite hide the scar that ran from his left ear to his jaw. Dave was a good man, Elena had learned. He asked few questions, paid in cash when she needed it, and never commented on the way she sometimes flinched when the first shots of the day rang out unexpectedly. "Morning, Elena," he called, his voice carrying the particular hoarseness of a long-time smoker. "Got a big group coming in at 8. Some kind of corporate team-building thing. They'll probably want to use lanes 1 through 6. Elena nodded, continuing her methodical cleaning. "I'll have everything ready. Fresh targets are already up, and I restocked the eye and ear protection yesterday." Dave paused, watching her work. There was something about the way Elena moved through the range that had always struck him as unusual. She wasn't just familiar with the environment, she was completely at ease in it. Her movements were economical, purposeful. She knew which lanes would need extra ventilation after heavy use, understood the subtle differences in cleaning requirements between pistol and rifle ranges, and had an almost supernatural ability to spot potential safety hazards before they became problems. "You sure you never worked at a range before this?" Dave had asked her once, about 3 months into her employment. Elena had simply shrugged. "I'm a quick learner." But Dave had been around firearms and the people who used them for most of his adult life. Elena's quick learning felt more like muscle memory. The front door chimed as the first customer of the day arrived early. Through the reinforced glass partition, Elena could see a tall man in civilian clothes, jeans, hiking boots, and a plain gray t-shirt. That did nothing to disguise the unmistakable bearing of someone accustomed to military discipline. His posture was perfect without being stiff, his movements controlled and aware. He carried a rifle case in one hand and a small duffel bag in the other. Dave greeted the newcomer while Elena continued her work, staying focused on the task at hand. She'd learned to become invisible during these early morning interactions. The serious shooters, the ones who arrived before the range officially opened, often had their own reasons for preferring solitude. "Good morning," the man said to Dave, his voice carrying a slight southern accent. "I called yesterday about extended range time. name's Jackson Walsh." Elena's hands stilled on her cleaning cloth for just a moment. Something about the name tickled at the edges of her memory, but she pushed the feeling aside. She'd been Elena Vasquez for 8 months now. Before that, she'd been someone else entirely. Someone whose name couldn't be spoken aloud without consequences. Dave led Walsh through the standard safety briefing and paperwork, though it was clear from the man's responses that he was far from a novice. As they talked, Elena noticed Walsh's eyes systematically cataloging the range layout, the ventilation system, the sight lines, the emergency exits. It was the kind of automatic threat assessment that became second nature to certain types of soldiers. "Lane 8's got the best natural light this time of morning," Dave offered, unlocking the ammunition cabinet. "What kind of shooting you planning to do?" "Precision work," Walsh replied simply. "Distance shooting. I've got some skills I need to keep sharp." Elena had moved on to cleaning the floor around Lane 7, close enough to overhear, but still maintaining her invisible presence. As Walsh began unpacking his equipment, she caught a glimpse of his rifle case's interior. The foam padding was custom-cut, professional grade. Whatever weapon he was carrying, it wasn't off the dash shelf. The rifle that emerged from the case made Elena's breath catch in her throat. It was a CHATAC M200 intervention, chambered in .408 CHATAC, the kind of precision rifle that cost more than most people's cars, designed for extreme long-range accuracy. Elena had seen exactly 3 of these weapons in her lifetime, and she'd fired 2 of them. Walsh's ammunition was equally specialized match-grade cartridges that he handled with the reverence of someone who understood their capabilities. As he began setting up his shooting position, Elena noticed the small details that marked him as far more than an enthusiast. The way he checked his scope's parallax adjustment, the methodical process of his pre-shot routine, the unconscious way he positioned his body to minimize his profile. This man was a professional. The question was, what kind of professional, and why was he here? Elena forced herself to continue cleaning, but her awareness was now entirely focused on Lane 8. Walsh had settled into a prone shooting position, his body forming the textbook alignment she remembered from her own training. When he fired his first shot, the sound was different from the usual range noise, sharper, more focused, carrying the particular crack of a high-velocity round, leaving a precision barrel. The target Walsh was using was set at the maximum distance. The indoor range allowed 100 yards. For most shooters, this was challenging. For the weapon he was using, it was almost insultingly close. Elena found herself drifting closer to Lane 8, ostensibly to clean the adjacent area, but actually driven by a curiosity she couldn't suppress. Walsh fired 3 more shots in careful succession, each separated by nearly a minute of preparation. Elena recognized the rhythm. He wasn't just shooting for accuracy, he was running through a specific drill, something designed to maintain muscle memory and breathing control under pressure. When Walsh finally stood to check his target, Elena caught sight of his grouping through the spotting scope he'd left on the bench. 4 shots, clustered in a space smaller than a quarter, dead center in the bullseye. At 100 yards, with a cold barrel, after what was clearly months or possibly years away from regular practice, Elena's hands tightened on her cleaning supplies. She knew exactly how difficult that kind of shooting was, because she'd once been capable of it herself. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Walsh returned to his shooting position, but before settling back into his prone stance, he glanced around the range with the automatic awareness of someone trained to monitor his environment. His gaze passed over Elena without seeming to register her presence, but she noticed the way his eyes briefly cataloged her position, her hands, her posture. He was good. Very good. The morning continued with Walsh methodically working through what Elena recognized as a precision shooting maintenance routine. Each shot was deliberate, each pause calculated. He wasn't practicing, he was remembering. Rebuilding neural pathways that had been forged under very different circumstances than a civilian shooting range in suburban Colorado. Elena had finished cleaning the range floor and was beginning to wipe down the shooting benches when Walsh's rifle case caught her attention again. A small patch was affixed to the inside lid, partially hidden by the foam padding. From her angle, she could only see a portion of it, but what she could see made her blood run cold. The distinctive trident and anchor of a Navy SEAL. Elena's cleaning cloth fell from suddenly nerveless fingers. She bent quickly to retrieve it, using the motion to cover the involuntary reaction, but her mind was racing. A Navy SEAL here, in her range, shooting like someone who'd been out of practice for months. The timing couldn't be coincidental. As she straightened up, Elena became aware that Walsh had stopped shooting. He was sitting on the bench behind lane 8, his rifle secured, but his attention no longer on his targets. Instead, he was watching her with the focused intensity of someone who'd noticed something out of place. "Excuse me," he said, his voice carrying easily across the space between them despite its conversational tone. "You've been working around here for a while?" Elena's throat felt suddenly dry. 8 months, she managed, keeping her voice steady through years of practiced control. "You seem to know your way around firearms," Walsh observed. It wasn't quite a question, but it hung in the air like one. "You pick things up, working in a place like this," Elena replied carefully. Walsh nodded slowly, but his eyes never left her face. "I'm sure you do. It's just the way you moved when I was shooting earlier. Most people, even people who work around guns, they tense up when someone's firing a precision rifle. Especially something like this." He gestured toward his Chaitak, "But you didn't. You moved like someone who's comfortable with the sound." Elena felt the familiar tightness in her chest that always accompanied moments when her carefully constructed new identity threatened to crack. "I've been around guns most of my life," she said, which was true enough. "Where'd you serve?" Walsh asked quietly. The question hit Elena like a physical blow. She hadn't been asked that question directly since she'd started working at the range. Dave had clearly suspected military service, but he'd never pushed for details. Now faced with someone who recognized the signs she thought she'd hidden, Elena felt the careful walls she'd built beginning to crumble. "I didn't," she said, but even as the words left her mouth, she knew they sounded hollow. Walsh studied her for a long moment, then stood and walked slowly toward her. His movements were non-threatening, but Elena's body automatically shifted into a defensive posture, subtle but unmistakable to someone trained to read body language. "My mistake," Walsh said, but his tone suggested he didn't believe his assumption had been incorrect. "It's just that patch on your arm. I caught a glimpse of it earlier when you were reaching up to clean that ventilation grate." Elena's hand instinctively moved to cover her left sleeve, but it was too late. Walsh had already seen enough. "Marine Corps scout sniper," he continued conversationally. "That's a hell of a school to graduate from. Hell of a job to walk away from too." Elena's world tilted. The patch, she'd been so careful to keep it covered, but during the morning's work, her sleeve must have ridden up. The tattoo that showed the bottom half of her scout sniper designation, the one she'd gotten after earning her place in one of the military's most elite units. "I don't know what you're talking about," Elena said, but her voice lacked conviction. Walsh reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. From it, he extracted a small card, his military ID, though he kept his thumb over the details. "I've worked with Marine snipers before," he said quietly. "Good people. People who deserve better than having to hide who they are." Elena felt something crack inside her chest. 8 months of carefully maintained anonymity. 8 months of being invisible. 8 months of pretending to be someone she wasn't, all of it threatened by a chance encounter with someone who recognized the signs she couldn't completely erase. What "Do you want?" she asked, and for the first time since arriving at Precision Point, her voice carried the steel that had once made enemy combatants think twice about their life choices. Walsh smiled, and the expression transformed his face completely. "I want to know why one of the Marine Corps' finest marksmen is cleaning floors instead of teaching the next generation how to shoot." Elena stared at him, her mind racing through possibilities and dangers and escape routes. But underneath the fear and the automatic threat assessment, she felt something she hadn't experienced in 8 months. The dangerous flutter of hope. The range's front door chimed again, and Dave's voice carried back to them. "Elena, the corporate group's here early. They want to get started." Elena looked toward the front office, then back at Walsh. The SEAL was still watching her with that mixture of professional interest and personal concern that she remembered from her former life, the way good leaders looked at valuable people who were in trouble. "This conversation isn't over," Walsh said quietly, "but I'm not going anywhere. I'll be here tomorrow morning, same time. If you want to talk about why you're hiding from the world, I'll listen. If you want to talk about what comes next, I'll help." Elena nodded once, sharply, then turned away to prepare for the corporate group's arrival. But as she walked toward the front office, she could feel Walsh's eyes on her back, and for the first time since she'd walked away from her old life, Elena wondered if maybe, just maybe, she was ready to remember who she used to be. The morning sun slanted through the range's windows, illuminating the brass casings scattered across the floor like fallen stars. In 12 hours, Elena would go home to her small apartment, eat dinner alone, and stare at the ceiling until sleep finally came. But tomorrow morning, she would have a choice to make. The question that would keep her awake wasn't whether Jackson Walsh could be trusted. The question was whether Elena Vasquez was ready to let Staff Sergeant Maria Santos come back from the dead. Elena's apartment was a study in deliberate anonymity. Located on the 3rd floor of a converted Victorian house 6 miles from the shooting range, it consisted of 3 rooms furnished with items that could have belonged to anyone. A beige couch from a second-hand store, a small dining table with 2 mismatched chairs, a bed with white sheets, and no personal photographs on the nightstand. The only hint of her former life was a small wooden box hidden beneath loose floorboards in the bedroom closet, containing items she couldn't bring herself to throw away, but couldn't bear to look at. That evening, Elena sat at her kitchen table, with a cup of coffee growing cold in her hands, staring out the window at the street below. A young couple walked their dog past the house, laughing at something one of them had said. The normalcy of the scene felt foreign to her, like watching life through bulletproof glass. 8 months ago, she'd been Staff Sergeant Maria Santos, decorated Marine Corps Scout Sniper, with 3 combat deployments and a reputation for shots that other snipers talked about in hushed, reverent tones. She'd been part of a 4-person team operating in the mountainous regions of Afghanistan, providing overwatch and precision fire support for special operations units. Her spotter, Corporal Danny Reeves, had been her closest friend in the Corps. A kid from Ohio who could calculate wind drift in his head faster than most people could work a calculator. The mission that ended everything had been routine by their standards. Establish overwatch positions for a pre-dawn raid on a compound suspected of housing high-value targets. Maria and Danny had been positioned on a ridgeline 800 meters from the target building, with clear sight lines and multiple escape routes planned. The operation was supposed to last 45 minutes from insertion to extraction. It had lasted 6 hours and 17 minutes, and when it was over, Danny was dead. Elena forced the memory away, a skill she'd developed through months of practice. She couldn't afford to think about Danny, about the investigation that followed, about the questions that had no good answers, and the accusations that destroyed her faith in the institution she'd served with honor. Instead, she focused on the immediate problem. Jackson Walsh knew who she was, or at least he knew who she had been. The question was what he intended to do with that knowledge. Elena's morning routine began at 4:30 a.m., exactly as it had every day for the past 8 months. She showered quickly, dressed in her standard work uniform of jeans and a long-sleeved shirt, and ate a breakfast of oatmeal and black coffee while reviewing the day's range schedule on her phone. The corporate team-building group would be back this morning, along with 3 police officers scheduled for qualification rounds and a retired Army colonel who came in twice a week to maintain his skills, and Jackson Walsh would be there, waiting for answers to questions she wasn't sure she was ready to address. The drive to Precision Point took her through the heart of Millbrook, Colorado, a small city that had grown up around a military contracting facility and never quite decided what it wanted to be. The downtown area was a mixture of coffee shops catering to young professionals and bars that opened early for shift workers at the local manufacturing plants. Elena had chosen this place specifically because it was forgettable, the kind of city where people minded their own business and didn't ask too many questions about their neighbors. She arrived at the range 45 minutes before opening time, using her key to enter through the back door as she had every morning since starting the job. The familiar smell of gun oil and cleaning solvents greeted her, along with the industrial quiet that meant she was alone with her thoughts. Elena had always been an early riser, but her reasons had evolved over the years. In the Marines, early mornings meant time to prepare, to review intelligence reports and weather conditions and equipment checks. Now early mornings meant solitude, a buffer between sleep and the necessity of interacting with other people. She began her routine by checking the range's environmental systems, ventilation, lighting, target retrieval mechanisms. Each task was performed with the methodical precision that had made her an effective sniper. Attention to detail, systematic approach, no shortcuts. The work itself was simple, but Elena found comfort in the routine, in the predictability of mechanical systems that functioned according to clear rules. As she cleaned the shooting lanes, Elena's mind drifted to the contradiction that had become her life. She was hiding from a profession that had given her purpose, identity, and a sense of belonging she'd never found anywhere else. But she was hiding in a place that reminded her daily of what she'd lost, surrounded by the tools and sounds and smells of the world she could no longer be part of. The irony wasn't lost on her. Maria Santos had been one of the most effective snipers in Marine Corps' history, capable of shots that defied physics and survived situations that should have been impossible. Elena Vasquez couldn't even buy groceries without carefully planning her route to avoid running into anyone who might want to make conversation. The transformation hadn't been immediate. After her discharge, honorable, but under circumstances that made finding civilian employment in her field impossible, Maria had spent 3 months in a veterans' transitional housing facility in San Diego. The counselors there had been well-meaning, but overwhelmed, dealing with hundreds of former service members struggling to adapt to civilian life. They'd helped her with resume writing and interview skills, but they couldn't help her with the fundamental problem. Maria Santos was a person who existed to solve problems through precision violence, and civilian society had no legitimate use for her particular skill set. Elena had emerged from that chrysalis like something from a nightmare fairy tale, all the deadly capabilities intact, but wrapped in the appearance of someone who wouldn't hurt a fly. She'd practiced in mirrors until she could smile on command, soften her posture, make her voice higher and less commanding. She'd learned to walk differently, to take up less space, to make eye contact without it feeling like a threat assessment. The process had been exhausting, but it had worked. For 8 months, she'd successfully convinced everyone around her that she was exactly what she appeared to be, a quiet woman with a mysterious past who kept to herself and did good work. Until Jackson Walsh had seen through the performance in less than an hour. Elena was restocking the ammunition cabinet when she heard the front door chime. Through the reinforced glass partition, she could see Walsh entering the range. carrying the same rifle case and wearing clothes that suggested he'd been up for hours. Military habits died hard. Dave greeted Walsh with the familiarity of a repeat customer, handling the paperwork and lane assignment with efficient professionalism. Elena continued her work, but she was acutely aware of Walsh's presence, of the way he moved through the space with the same controlled awareness she'd noticed the day before. When Walsh passed through the door into the shooting area, he nodded to Elena politely but didn't immediately approach her. Instead, he set up his equipment at Lane 8 again, going through the same methodical preparation routine she'd observed previously. The message was clear. He would be here, doing his own work, available if she wanted to talk but not pressuring her for answers. Elena appreciated the professionalism, even as it made her more curious about his background. Navy SEALs were known for many things, but subtle psychological manipulation wasn't typically among them. Walsh's approach suggested either extensive training in human intelligence work or natural, emotional intelligence that went beyond typical special operations skill sets. As the morning progressed, other customers arrived, and the range filled with the controlled chaos of multiple people shooting simultaneously. Elena moved through her duties with practiced efficiency, but part of her attention remained focused on Lane 8, where Walsh was methodically working through precision shooting drills. Around 10 a.m., during a brief lull in activity, Walsh approached the front counter where Elena was organizing paperwork. "Good morning," he said, his tone carefully neutral. "I was wondering if you might have a few minutes to look at something. I'm having trouble with my scope tracking, and I could use a second opinion." Elena looked up from her clipboard, meeting his eyes directly for the first time since their conversation the previous day. Walsh's expression was open, professional, giving no indication that this was anything other than a routine request for technical assistance. "I can take a look," Elena said after a moment's hesitation. She followed Walsh back to Lane 8, where his rifle was secured in a shooting rest. The Chaitak was a beautiful weapon, clearly well-maintained and equipped with optics that cost more than most people's monthly salary. Walsh had been shooting at targets placed at varying distances, and Elena could see the results scattered across multiple target boards. "The problem is here," Walsh said, pointing to a target set at 75 yards. "My point of impact is shifting between shots, even with the rifle secured in the rest. I'm wondering if the scope's internals are damaged, or if there's something wrong with my mounting system." Elena studied the target, her trained eye automatically analyzing the shot grouping. The holes were clustered in an area about 2 inches across, which was excellent shooting by civilian standards, but loose enough to suggest a mechanical problem for a shooter of Walsh's obvious skill level. "May I?" she asked, gesturing toward the rifle. Walsh nodded, stepping back to give her access to the weapon. Elena's hands moved with practiced familiarity as she examined the scope mounting system. The rings were properly torqued, the base was securely attached to the rifle's receiver, and the scope itself showed no obvious signs of damage. She cycled the elevation and windage adjustments, feeling for any binding or irregular movement in the mechanisms. "When did you last zero this rifle?" she asked, her voice taking on the professional tone she'd used when consulting with other snipers. "About 6 months ago," Walsh replied. "It's been in storage since then." Elena nodded, continuing her examination. 6 months in storage could cause subtle shifts in a precision rifle system, especially if the weapon had been transported or subjected to temperature changes. She checked the scope's parallax adjustment, the consistency of the trigger pull, the bedding of the action in the stock. "Your scope's fine," she said finally. "The problem is environmental. Storage can cause subtle shifts in bedding pressure, and your barrel harmonics have probably changed slightly. You need to re-establish your zero and work up a new load if you're using hand-loaded ammunition." Walsh was quiet for a long moment, watching her face. "That's a very specific diagnosis from someone who supposedly doesn't have formal training." Elena felt the familiar flush of anxiety, but she forced herself to meet his gaze steadily. "I told you, I've been around guns most of my life." "Maria," Walsh said quietly, and Elena's world stopped. The use of her real name hit her like a physical blow. She took an involuntary step backward, her hand instinctively moving toward her hip where she'd once carried a sidearm. "How?" she whispered. Walsh reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, showing her a photograph displayed on the screen. It was a military portrait, Maria Santos in dress blues, her chest decorated with ribbons that told the story of 3 combat deployments and exceptional service. Her hair was shorter in the photo, her expression more confident, but there was no mistaking the face. "I spent some time last night making phone calls," Walsh said. "Staff Sergeant Maria Santos, Marine Corps Scout Sniper, 3 deployments, bronze. Star with V device, Navy Cross recommendation that got downgraded to a Silver Star for reasons that nobody wants to talk about. Discharged 8 months ago under circumstances that are classified so far above my pay grade that I can't even find out who classified them." Elena stared at the photograph, seeing herself as she used to be. The woman in the picture looked like someone who could handle anything the world threw at her. Elena Vasquez felt like she might collapse from the weight of her own secrets. "What do you want?" she asked again, but this time her voice carried less anger and more exhaustion. "I want to know why one of the best snipers the Marine Corps ever produced is hiding in a small town in Colorado instead of training the next generation of warriors." Elena laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "Because the Marine Corps decided that one of its best snipers was also a murderer." The words hung in the air between them like smoke from a muzzle flash. Elena hadn't spoken them aloud since the day she'd signed her discharge papers, and hearing them in her own voice made them feel more real, more damning. Walsh's expression didn't change. "What happened?" Elena looked around the range, at the other shooters focused on their own training, at the normal world continuing its normal functions, while her carefully constructed new life crumbled around her. She thought about walking away, about disappearing again, about finding another small town where she could become someone else entirely. Instead, she heard herself begin to speak. "My spotter was killed during a mission. The investigation concluded that he died because I took an unauthorized shot that compromised our position. They said I prioritized a target of opportunity over the safety of my team. What do you say?" Elena met Walsh's eyes, and for the first time in 8 months, she answered that question with complete honesty. "I say that Danny Reeves died because I wasn't good enough to save him." Walsh didn't speak immediately after Elena's admission. He simply nodded once, the kind of acknowledgement that came from someone who understood the weight of responsibility that special operations personnel carried. Around them, the range continued its normal rhythm, the crack of pistol fire, the mechanical whir of target retrieval systems, the muffled conversations of shooters discussing their accuracy. "Tell me about the mission," Walsh said finally. Elena looked toward the front office where Dave was helping a customer select ammunition. They had perhaps 10 minutes before someone would need her attention. 10 minutes to begin excavating a story she'd buried so deeply that sometimes she almost believed it had happened to someone else. "Operation Nightfall," she began, her voice taking on the flat, factual tone of a military briefing. "Joint Special Operations raid on a compound in the Kunar province. Intelligence indicated high-value targets were using the location for planning coordinated attacks on coalition forces. My team was assigned Overwatch myself and Corporal Danny Reeves, positioned on a ridgeline approximately 800 meters from the primary target." Walsh nodded, his attention completely focused on her words. Elena could see him processing the tactical situation, building a mental map of the operation based on her description. The raid team was supposed to be in and out in 45 minutes. Quick strike, grab whoever was there, extract before enemy reinforcements could arrive. Danny and I had 3 specific targets if things went sideways: a machine gun position, a possible sniper hide, and a command bunker where enemy leadership might try to coordinate a response. Elena's hands moved unconsciously as she spoke, sketching invisible terrain features in the air. The muscle memory of briefings and mission planning sessions was still intact, even after 8 months of trying to forget. "What went wrong?" Walsh asked. "Everything." Elena's voice carried a bitter edge. The intelligence was bad. Instead of finding 5 or 6 mid-level planners, the raid team walked into a meeting of 20-plus fighters, including at least 3 high-value targets. The compound was hardened beyond what we'd been briefed: reinforced positions, overlapping fields of fire, escape tunnels we didn't know about. She paused, remembering the moment when routine had transformed into chaos. The first gunshots from the compound had been sporadic, almost hesitant. Within minutes, they'd escalated to sustained automatic weapons fire that lit up the night like a deadly fireworks display. The raid team was pinned down almost immediately. The enemy had prepared for exactly this kind of assault, and they were ready. Danny and I started engaging targets as they appeared, trying to suppress the defensive positions enough for our guys to move. Walsh was quiet, but Elena could see the questions forming in his mind. Professional curiosity mixed with the kind of concern that came from having been in similar situations himself. For the first 2 hours, everything went according to contingency planning. We engaged 13 confirmed targets, cleared fields of fire for the assault team, and provided accurate intelligence on enemy positions. Danny was perfect, his spotting calls were textbook, his target identification was flawless. We were doing exactly what we'd trained for. Elena's voice caught slightly as she reached the part of the story that had replayed in her nightmares for 8 months. Then I saw him. Walsh waited, understanding that this was the crucial moment in her narrative. High-value target number 1. The man we'd been hunting for 6 months. The one responsible for coordinating attacks that had killed dozens of coalition personnel. He appeared in a window of the command bunker, just for a few seconds, but I had a clear shot. Range was approximately 900 meters, moderate crosswind. Target was stationary. Elena's hands moved again, this time mimicking the familiar motions of acquiring a target through a rifle scope. Her body remembered the feeling of settling into a perfect shooting position, the controlled breathing, the gradual squeeze of the trigger. Danny called it as a no-shoot. The angle was wrong taking. The shot would have revealed our position to enemy forces that hadn't spotted us yet. Protocol was to wait for a better opportunity or until the target presented a threat to the assault team. Walsh's expression remained neutral, but Elena could see him working through the tactical mathematics in his head. The eternal sniper's dilemma, the perfect shot that came at the wrong moment. I took the shot anyway. The admission hung between them like a confession at a tribunal. Elena had never spoken those words to anyone except the investigators who'd questioned her after the mission. Clean kill, center mass, target eliminated. But Danny was right about the angle. The muzzle flash and sound signature gave away our position immediately. 3 enemy fighters who'd been searching for us suddenly knew exactly where we were. Walsh nodded slowly. In the special operations community, stories like this were common split-second decisions that could save or doom an entire mission. Choices made in milliseconds that would be analyzed and second-guessed for years afterward. "How long before they reached your position?" he asked. 17 minutes. We had partial concealment and good fields of fire, but they were moving with purpose. Danny started calling in our situation while I engaged the approaching fighters. We eliminated 6 more targets, but they kept coming. Elena's voice was steady now, locked into the rhythm of tactical reporting. It was easier to think about the mission in terms of numbers and movements rather than the human cost. At approximately 0347 hours, an enemy sniper engaged our position from an unexpected angle. Danny was providing overwatch while I dealt with The approaching assault team. The enemy shooter was skilled. He'd moved into position without us detecting him, found an angle that bypassed our cover. Elena stopped, the words suddenly becoming too heavy to continue. Walsh waited patiently, recognizing the signs of someone approaching the hardest part of their story. Danny took the hit center mass. High-velocity round, probably 7.62 millimeters. He was ... double quotes Lana's voice, slightly. He was calling out target positions when it happened. Never stopped doing his job, even after he was hit. The range around them seemed to fade into background noise as Elena continued her account. Other shooters were firing their weapons, but the sounds felt distant, muffled by the weight of memory. I neutralized the enemy sniper, but Danny was unconscious and bleeding badly. The assault team was still pinned down in the compound, so extraction wasn't possible. I had to maintain our position while providing medical aid and continuing to engage targets as they appeared. Walsh's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He'd been in enough combat situations to understand the impossible position. Elena had found herself responsible for keeping an entire assault team alive, while trying to save her wounded partner. How long? 4 hours and 37 minutes. Danny regained consciousness twice, long enough to help me with target identification and range estimation. The second time, he was lucid enough to know he wasn't going to make it. Elena's hands were trembling now, so slightly that most people wouldn't have noticed. But Walsh's trained eye caught the movement, understanding it as a physical manifestation of psychological wounds that hadn't healed. The extraction helicopter couldn't reach us until dawn. By the time the medics got to Danny, he'd been unconscious for over an hour. He died en route to the field hospital. Walsh was quiet for a long moment, processing the story. Elena could see him working through the tactical elements, trying to understand how a successful mission high-value target eliminated, assault team extracted safely, Overwatch position maintained under extreme pressure had resulted in her discharge from the Marine Corps. What did the investigation conclude? He asked finally. Elena's expression hardened. That I violated direct orders by taking an unauthorized shot, that my actions directly led to the compromise of our position and Danny's death. They said I prioritized personal glory over mission parameters and team safety. Walsh's eyes narrowed. What evidence did they have to support that conclusion? Danny's final radio transmission, Elena said, her voice becoming even flatter. Before he lost consciousness the last time, he made a call to Mission Command. The investigators claimed he reported that I had acted against his explicit instructions and endangered the mission. Did he? Elena looked directly at Walsh, her dark eyes holding a mixture of pain and defiance. Danny Reeves was the best spotter in the Marine Corps. He was also my closest friend. In his final transmission, he told command that Staff Sergeant Santos had performed exceptionally under impossible circumstances, and that the mission's success was due to her actions. Walsh leaned back slightly, processing this information. Then, why? Because someone needed to be blamed, Elena interrupted. Because a joint special operations mission that was supposed to last 45 minutes turned into a 6-hour firefight that required 2 additional helicopter insertions and resulted in a Marine Kier, because the intelligence failure that put our people in danger came from so high up the chain of command that it was easier to sacrifice one staff sergeant than to admit the truth. The bitterness in Elena's voice was sharp enough to cut glass. Walsh could see the anger beneath her carefully maintained control, the rage of someone who had served with honor only to be betrayed by the institution she dedicated her life to protecting. The audio recording of Danny's transmission was classified. Elena continued. The investigating officers told me that revealing its contents would compromise ongoing operations and endanger other personnel. They offered me a choice: accept responsibility for the mission's complications and take an honorable discharge, or face a court-martial based on evidence that I wasn't allowed to see or challenge. Walsh understood immediately. He'd seen enough military politics to recognize the pattern junior personnel sacrifice to protect senior officers, truth buried beneath layers of classification and operational security. It was the kind of institutional betrayal that destroyed careers and shattered lives. "So you took the discharge," he said. "I took the discharge, but not before they made sure my reputation was destroyed." Word spread through the sniper community that Maria Santos had gotten her spotter killed through reckless action. No security contractor would hire me. No law enforcement agency would consider my application. I was toxic. 8 months ago, she'd been Staff Sergeant Maria Santos, decorated Marine Corps Scout sniper, with 3 combat deployments and a reputation for shots that other snipers talked about in hushed, reverent tones. She'd been part of a 4-person team operating in the mountainous regions of Afghanistan, providing overwatch and precision fire support for special operations units. Her spotter, Corporal Danny Reeves, had been her closest friend in the Corps. A kid from Ohio who could calculate wind drift in his head faster than most people could work a calculator. The mission that ended everything had been routine by their standards. Establish overwatch positions for a pre-dawn raid on a compound suspected of housing high-value targets. Maria and Danny had been positioned on a ridgeline 800 meters from the target building, with clear sight lines and multiple escape routes planned. The operation was supposed to last 45 minutes from insertion to extraction. It had lasted 6 hours and 17 minutes, and when it was over, Danny was dead. Elena forced the memory away, a skill she'd developed through months of practice. She couldn't afford to think about Danny, about the investigation that followed, about the questions that had no good answers, and the accusations that destroyed her faith in the institution she'd served with honor. Instead, she focused on the immediate problem. Jackson Walsh knew who she was, or at least he knew who she had been. The question was what he intended to do with that knowledge. Elena's morning routine began at 4:30 a.m., exactly as it had every day for the past 8 months. She showered quickly, dressed in her standard work uniform of jeans and a long-sleeved shirt, and ate a breakfast of oatmeal and black coffee while reviewing the day's range schedule on her phone. The corporate team-building group would be back this morning, along with 3 police officers scheduled for qualification rounds and a retired Army colonel who came in twice a week to maintain his skills, and Jackson Walsh would be there, waiting for answers to questions she wasn't sure she was ready to address. The drive to Precision Point took her through the heart of Millbrook, Colorado, a small city that had grown up around a military contracting facility and never quite decided what it wanted to be. The downtown area was a mixture of coffee shops catering to young professionals and bars that opened early for shift workers at the local manufacturing plants. Elena had chosen this place specifically because it was forgettable, the kind of city where people minded their own business and didn't ask too many questions about their neighbors. She arrived at the range 45 minutes before opening time, using her key to enter through the back door, as she had every morning since starting the job. The familiar smell of gun oil and cleaning solvents greeted her, along with the industrial quiet that meant she was alone with her thoughts. Elena had always been an early riser, but her reasons had evolved over the years. In the Marines, early mornings meant time to prepare, to review intelligence reports and weather conditions and equipment checks. Now early mornings meant solitude, a buffer between sleep and the necessity of interacting with other people. She began her routine by checking the range's environmental systems, ventilation, lighting, target retrieval mechanisms. Each task was performed with the methodical precision that had made her an effective sniper. Attention to detail, systematic approach, no shortcuts. The work itself was simple, but Elena found comfort in the routine, in the predictability of mechanical systems that functioned according to clear rules. As she cleaned the shooting lanes, Elena's mind drifted to the contradiction that had become her life. She was hiding from a profession that had given her purpose, identity, and a sense of belonging she'd never found anywhere else. But she was hiding in a place that reminded her daily of what she'd lost, surrounded by the tools and sounds and smells of the world she could no longer be part of. The irony wasn't lost on her. Maria Santos had been one of the most effective snipers in Marine Corps' history, capable of shots that defied physics and survived situations that should have been impossible. Elena Vasquez couldn't even buy groceries without carefully planning her route to avoid running into anyone who might want to make conversation. The transformation hadn't been immediate. After her discharge honorable, but under circumstances that made finding civilian employment in her field impossible, Maria had spent 3 months in a veterans' transitional housing facility in San Diego. The counselors there had been well-meaning, but overwhelmed, dealing with hundreds of former service members struggling to adapt to civilian life. They'd helped her with resume writing and interview skills, but they couldn't help her with the fundamental problem. Maria Santos was a person who existed to solve problems through precision violence, and civilian society had no legitimate use for her particular skill set. Elena had emerged from that chrysalis like something from a nightmare fairy tale, all the deadly capabilities intact, but wrapped in the appearance of someone who wouldn't hurt a fly. She'd practiced in mirrors until she could smile on command, soften her posture, make her voice higher and less commanding. She'd learned to walk differently, to take up less space, to make eye contact without it feeling like a threat assessment. The process had been exhausting, but it had worked. For 8 months, she'd successfully convinced everyone around her that she was exactly what she appeared to be. A quiet woman with a mysterious past who kept to herself and did good work. Until Jackson Walsh had seen through the performance in less than an hour. Elena was restocking the ammunition cabinet when she heard the front door chime. Through the reinforced glass partition, she could see Walsh entering the range, carrying the same rifle case and wearing clothes that suggested he'd been up for hours. Military habits died hard. Dave greeted Walsh with the familiarity of a repeat customer, handling the paperwork and lane assignment with efficient professionalism. Elena continued her work, but she was acutely aware of Walsh's presence, of the way he moved through the space with the same controlled awareness she'd noticed the day before. When Walsh passed through the door into the shooting area, he nodded to Elena politely but didn't immediately approach her. Instead, he set up his equipment at Lane 8 again, going through the same methodical preparation routine she'd observed previously. The message was clear. He would be here, doing his own work, available if she wanted to talk but not pressuring her for answers. Elena appreciated the professionalism, even as it made her more curious about his background. Navy SEALs were known for many things, but subtle psychological manipulation wasn't typically among them. Walsh's approach suggested either extensive training in human intelligence work or natural, emotional intelligence that went beyond typical special operations skill sets. As the morning progressed, other customers arrived and the range filled with the controlled chaos of multiple people shooting simultaneously. Elena moved through her duties with practiced efficiency, but part of her attention remained focused on Lane 8, where Walsh was methodically working through precision shooting drills. Around 10 a.m., during a brief lull in activity, Walsh approached the front counter where Elena was organizing paperwork. "Good morning," he said, his tone carefully neutral. "I was wondering if you might have a few minutes to look at something. I'm having trouble with my scope tracking, and I could use a second opinion." Elena looked up from her clipboard, meeting his eyes directly for the first time since their conversation the previous day. Walsh's expression was open, professional, giving no indication that this was anything other than a routine request for technical assistance. "I can take a look," Elena said after a moment's hesitation. She followed Walsh back to Lane 8, where his rifle was secured in a shooting rest. The Chaytak was a beautiful weapon, clearly well-maintained and equipped with optics that cost more than most people's monthly salary. Walsh had been shooting at targets placed at varying distances, and Elena could see the results scattered across multiple target boards. "The problem is here," Walsh said, pointing to a target set at 75 yards. "My point of impact is shifting between shots, even with the rifle secured in the rest. I'm wondering if the scope's internals are damaged, or if there's something wrong with my mounting system." Elena studied the target, her trained eye automatically analyzing the shot grouping. The holes were clustered in an area about 2 inches across, which was excellent shooting by civilian standards, but loose enough to suggest a mechanical problem for a shooter of Walsh's obvious skill level. After Mitchell left, Elena and Walsh stood in the relative quiet of the early morning range. The other customers hadn't arrived yet, leaving them alone with the weight of revelations that had turned Elena's world upside down. "How did you know?" Elena asked finally. Walsh was cleaning his rifle with the methodical precision of someone who had performed the task thousands of times. "I didn't, not at first. But your story didn't add up. A Marine with your reputation doesn't get discharged for a single tactical decision, especially not one that resulted in mission success. So I started making phone calls. To who? People I trust. People who've worked with Marine snipers. People who know how the system works when it wants to protect itself." Walsh looked up from his rifle. "It took 3 days to find someone willing to admit that your case stank from the beginning. It took another 4 days to find Captain Mitchell and convince her to look at the evidence." Elena felt something she hadn't experienced in 8 months. Gratitude that came without suspicion attached. "Why?" she asked. "Why would you do that for someone you barely know?" Walsh was quiet for a long moment, reassembling his rifle with practice. "Efficiency. Because 8 months ago, you were serving your country with honor. Today, you're cleaning floors and hiding from the world because someone decided you were expendable. That's not justice, and it's not what Danny Reeves died for." Elena felt tears threatening for the first time since her discharge. She'd spent so long believing that she was responsible for Danny's death that hearing someone defend her actions felt like absolution she didn't deserve. "I still made the choice to take that shot," she said. "Danny still died because of the position it put us in." Walsh finished assembling his rifle and looked directly at her. "Maria, you made a tactical decision in combat that eliminated a high-value target and ultimately saved the lives of the entire assault team. Corporal Reeves died because an enemy sniper found an unexpected angle of attack, not because you acted inappropriately. The fact that someone convinced you otherwise is just another part of the injustice." Elena nodded slowly, beginning to understand that the guilt she'd carried for 8 months might not be entirely her burden to bear. The morning progressed with an unusual sense of potential hanging in the air. Elena went through her normal routine cleaning, restocking, assisting customers, but her mind was focused on the choice that Captain Mitchell had presented. She could return to the Marines, reclaim her identity as Staff Sergeant Maria Santos, and resume the career that had given her life meaning. Or she could remain Elena Vasquez, safe in her anonymity, but forever separated from the person she used to be. Around noon, Dave approached her while she was organizing paperwork at the front counter. "Everything okay?" he asked, his gruff voice carrying genuine concern. "You seem distracted today." Elena looked at her boss, this man who had given her a job when she'd needed one most, who had asked no questions about her past and made no demands on her future. He deserved honesty, even if she couldn't tell him everything. "I might be leaving," she said. "My old employer wants me back." Dave nodded slowly. "Military?" Elena was surprised by his directness. "How did you know?" Dave smiled, the expression softening his weathered features. "Elena, I've been around Marines my whole adult life. You move like someone who's been in combat. You understand weapon systems better than most people who work with them professionally. And you've got the bearing of someone who's used to command responsibility. I figured you'd served, probably saw some action, and had your reasons for not talking about it. Elena felt a flush of embarrassment. I thought I was better at hiding it. You are, Dave assured her. Most people wouldn't notice. But I'm not most people. He paused, studying her face. Whatever happened that made you leave the Corps, it wasn't your fault. Elena looked at him in surprise. How can you be sure? Because Marines like you don't get forced out unless someone higher up needs a scapegoat. I've seen it before, good people destroyed to protect bad officers. It's one of the ugliest things about military culture. Elena felt the walls around her emotions cracking further. Dave's casual acceptance of her military background, his understanding of the political realities that had ended her career, his simple declaration that she was a good person who had been wronged, all of it combined to make her feel less alone than she had in months. If you go back, Dave continued, I'll miss having you around. You're the best employee I've ever had. But if staying here means you're running from something that wasn't your fault, then maybe it's time to stop running. Elena nodded, not trusting herself to speak. That evening, Elena sat in her apartment with Captain Mitchell's business card in her hand and her phone on the table in front of her. The call would take less than 5 minutes, a simple yes or no, to the question of whether she wanted her old life back, but the choice felt impossibly complex. Maria Santos had been confident, capable, defined by her service to something larger than herself. Elena Vasquez was cautious, damaged, safe in her isolation but empty of purpose. The woman who had once been one of the Marine Corps' most effective snipers was now afraid to make a phone call. Elena looked around her anonymous apartment, at the life she'd built from the pieces of her shattered identity. It was safe, but it wasn't living. Danny Reeves had died believing that her actions saved lives and deserved recognition. Maybe it was time to stop dishonoring his memory with her fear. Elena picked up the phone and dialed Captain Mitchell's number. Captain Mitchell answered on the first ring, as if she'd been waiting for Elena's call. Staff Sergeant Santos, Mitchell sighed, her voice carrying professional warmth. I hoped I'd hear from you. Elena took a deep breath, her hand trembling slightly as she held the phone. I want to know everything. Not just about the recordings, but about who was involved, why they did it, and what's going to happen to them. Can you come to Colorado Springs tomorrow? There's a lot to discuss, and some people you should meet. Elena agreed, and spent the rest of the evening staring at her reflection in the bathroom mirror, trying to reconcile the face looking back at her with the woman she was about to become again. Elena Vasquez had been a necessary fiction, a protective shell that had allowed her to survive 8 months of exile. But tomorrow, she would begin the process of letting Maria Santos emerge from hiding. The drive to Colorado Springs took Elena through mountain passes she'd traveled during her recovery period, when she'd first come to Colorado seeking anonymity. The landscape looked different now, less like a hiding place and more like a temporary refuge that had served its purpose. The meeting was held at the Peterson Space Force Base, in a conference room that smelled of government coffee and institutional furniture polish. Captain Mitchell was there, along with 2 other Marines Elena didn't recognize, a lieutenant colonel named Bradley, whose ribbons indicated extensive combat experience, and a major named Hendricks, who wore the kind of civilian clothes that suggested intelligence work. Staff Sergeant Santos, Lieutenant Colonel Bradley said as Elena entered the room, thank you for coming. I want to start by apologizing on behalf of the Marine Corps for what you've endured. Elena took a seat at the conference table, feeling the familiar weight of military formality settling around her like a uniform she'd almost forgotten how to wear. Captain Mitchell mentioned new evidence, Elena said. I want to hear it all. Major Hendricks opened a laptop computer and turned it toward Elena. 3 weeks ago, as part of a routine security audit, we discovered that multiple classified recordings from Operation Nightfall had been stored in an archive system that wasn't included in your original investigation. The recordings paint a Complete picture of the mission that contradicts almost everything you were told. Elena leaned forward, her attention focused entirely on Hendricks' words. The first revelation involves the intelligence briefing for your mission. The original assessment indicated 5 to 6 low-value targets at the compound. The actual intelligence that was available but not shared with mission planner showed clear evidence of a major enemy meeting scheduled for that exact night. Elena's jaw tightened. They knew it was going to be a larger engagement. Colonel Webb, who was responsible for intelligence distribution, made the decision to withhold that information because he believed it would result in the mission being canceled or postponed. Hendricks continued. He wanted the credit for capturing high-value targets, but he didn't want to risk his career by acknowledging the increased danger to personnel. Captain Mitchell slid a folder across the table to Elena. This contains transcripts of conversations between Webb and his superiors in the days leading up to the mission. He explicitly states that he's managing the intelligence picture to ensure the operation proceeds as planned. Elena opened the folder and began reading. The transcripts painted a picture of an officer more concerned with his career advancement than with the safety of the Marines under his command. Webb had deliberately minimized threat assessments, suppressed information about enemy capabilities, and ignored intelligence indicators that should have resulted in additional support for the mission. The second major revelation involves the timeline of events during the mission itself, Lieutenant Colonel Bradley said. Based on communications intercepts and after-action analysis, your decision to engage the high-value target came at exactly the moment when the assault team was about to be overrun. Your shot eliminated the enemy commander who was coordinating the defense, which directly led to the collapse of organized resistance. Elena looked up from the transcripts. That's not what the investigation concluded. No, it's not, Bradley. Agreed. The investigation concluded that your shot was taken for personal reasons and endangered your position unnecessarily. But the communications evidence shows that Corporal Reeves was actually providing target identification assistance for your shot, not advising against it. Major Hendricks activated an audio file on his laptop. This is Corporal Reeves' voice, recorded during the mission. Danny's voice filled the conference room, tinny through the laptop speakers, but unmistakably him. Elena's breath caught as she heard her dead friend's voice for the first time in 8 months. Santos, I've got eyes. On HVT-1, second floor window, northwest corner. Range approximately 900 meters, light crosswind from the south. Target is stationary. Clear shot if you can get the angle. Elena's hands gripped the edge of the table. That wasn't the voice of someone advising against engagement. It was the voice of a professional spotter providing targeting assistance. There's more, Hendricks said, advancing to another file. This is 30 seconds later. Danny's voice again. Target down, clean kill. Nice shot, Santos. That should break up their command structure. Elena stared at the laptop, her mind reeling. The investigation had portrayed her shot as impulsive and unauthorized, taken against Danny's advice. But the recordings proved that he had not only supported the engagement, but actively assisted with it. How is this possible? Elena whispered. How could the investigation get it so wrong? Captain Mitchell leaned forward. Because Colonel Webb edited the recordings before submitting them as evidence. He removed all of Corporal Reeves' targeting assistance and kept only fragments that could be interpreted as criticism of your actions. Lieutenant Colonel Bradley opened another folder. We've identified 17 separate instances where Webb altered, deleted, or misrepresented evidence during your investigation. His goal was to create a narrative where you acted recklessly and got your spotter killed, deflecting attention from his own intelligence failures. Elena felt a rage building inside her that she hadn't allowed herself to experience since her discharge. 8 months of guilt, 8 months of believing that her actions had killed her best friend, 8 months of hiding from a reputation destroyed by lies. "Where is Webb now?" she asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "Under arrest, Major," Hendricks replied. "Military confinement facility at Quantico, awaiting court-martial on charges of conspiracy, falsifying official records, and conduct prejudicial to good order and discipline. He's looking at 20 years minimum." Elena nodded slowly, processing. The magnitude of Webb's betrayal. What about the other investigators, the ones who accepted his evidence without question? "That's more complicated," Lieutenant Colonel Bradley admitted. "Most of them were operating on information they had no reason to suspect was falsified. However, we've identified 2 officers who knew about Webb's deception and chose to remain silent. They're facing their own legal proceedings." Captain Mitchell slid another document across the table. "This is your complete service record, as it should have been written. Based on the actual evidence from Operation Nightfall, you're being recommended for the Navy Cross, promotion to gunnery sergeant, and assignment as the senior instructor at the Marine Corps Scout Sniper School." Elena stared at the paperwork, seeing her real name, Maria Santos, typed on official Marine Corps letterhead. The commendations, the promotion, the recognition she'd been denied 8 months ago. "There's something else," Major Hendricks said. "Corporal Reeves' final transmission, the one that was edited for your investigation. Would you like to hear the complete recording?" Elena nodded, not trusting her voice. Hendricks activated another audio file. Danny's voice filled the room again, but this time he sounded different, weaker. Labored, clearly wounded, but still professional. "Command. This is Overwatch 2. I have been wounded by enemy sniper fire, but my condition is stable. Staff Sergeant Santos has maintained our position under extreme enemy pressure for over 4 hours. Her actions have directly prevented the loss of the entire assault team. Recommends Santos for Silver Star or higher decoration. Mission success is due entirely to her exceptional performance under fire." There was a pause in the recording, then Danny's voice again, quieter but still clear. "Tell Santos she's the best sniper I ever worked with." "It's been an honor." Elena broke. 8 months of suppressed grief, 8 months of guilt and self-recrimination, 8 months of believing that she had failed the person who mattered most to her. All of it came pouring out in great, gasping sobs that shook her entire body. Captain Mitchell moved to sit beside her, offering a box of tissues and the kind of quiet support that came from understanding the weight of military loss. Lieutenant Colonel Bradley and Major Hendricks waited patiently, recognizing that Elena needed time to process emotions she'd been forced to bury. "He didn't blame me," Elena finally managed to say through her tears. "He didn't think I got him killed." "No," Captain Mitchell said gently. "He thought you were a hero. He used his final transmission to make sure that official record would reflect that." Elena wiped her eyes and looked around the conference room at the 3 Marines who had worked to uncover the truth. "Why did you do this? Why did you keep investigating after my case was closed?" Lieutenant Colonel Bradley answered. "Because Marines don't leave Marines behind. Your case was a miscarriage of justice that dishonored the Corps and betrayed one of our finest warriors. That couldn't be allowed to stand." Major Hendricks added, "Also because Jackson Walsh is very persuasive when he believes an injustice has been done. He made some phone calls that got our attention." Elena smiled through her tears. "I need to thank him." "You'll have the chance," Captain Mitchell said. "He's waiting outside. He wanted to be here when you heard the truth." Elena stood up, feeling lighter than she had in 8 months. The weight of false guilt was lifting, replaced by the clarity that came from understanding what had really happened during Operation Nightfall. "What happens now?" she asked. "That's up to you," Lieutenant Colonel Bradley replied. "The Marine Corps would be honored to have you back. Your record will be corrected, your rank restored, and you'll receive the recognition you deserve. But if you've built a different life, we'll understand that choice too." Elena thought about her apartment in Millbrook, about Dave and the shooting range. about the quiet anonymity she'd constructed to protect herself from a world that had rejected her. 8 months ago, that refuge had been necessary. Now it felt like a prison of her own making. "I want to come back," Elena said. "I want to be Maria Santos again," Captain Mitchell smiled. "Then welcome home, Gunnery Sergeant Santos." Elena spent the next hour reviewing paperwork and discussing the logistics of her reinstatement. The Marine Corps was prepared to expedite her return to active duty, with assignment to the Scout Sniper School at Camp Pendleton beginning in 3 weeks. She would be responsible for training the next generation of Marine snipers, passing on the skills and knowledge that had made her one of the Corps' most effective marksmen. When the official business was concluded, Elena stepped outside the conference room to find Jackson Walsh waiting in the hallway. He was wearing his dress blue uniform, the ribbons on his chest telling the story of a distinguished career in naval special warfare. "How do you feel?" he asked as they walked toward the building's exit. Elena considered the question carefully. "Like I've been holding my breath for 8 months and can finally exhale," Walsh nodded. "The truth has a way of doing that." They reached Walsh's truck in the parking lot, and Elena turned to face him. "Why did you do this? You barely knew me." Walsh was quiet for a moment, looking out at the mountains that surrounded Colorado Springs. "Because I've seen what happens when good people are sacrificed to protect bad institutions. Because Danny Reeves deserved better than having his memory dishonored by lies. And because you deserved better than spending your life hiding from who you are." Elena felt tears threatening again, but these were different tears of gratitude. Rather than grief. "I don't know how to thank you," she said. "Don't thank me," Walsh replied. "Thank the system that finally worked the way it was supposed to. Thank the Marines who refused to let an injustice stand. And thank yourself for having the courage to reclaim your identity." The drive back to Millbrook gave Elena time to think about the magnitude of the changes ahead. She would need to leave Colorado, leave the safe anonymity she'd built, and return to a world where Maria Santos was known and recognized. The prospect was both exciting and terrifying, but as she thought about Danny's final transmission, about his assessment of her performance and his pride in their partnership, Elena realized that hiding from her identity had been a betrayal of his memory. Danny had died believing that she was an exceptional Marine who deserved recognition for her service. The least she could do was honor that belief by becoming that Marine again. Elena arrived at Precision Point as the evening light was fading, casting long shadows across the parking lot. Dave was locking up the front office, preparing to close for the day. "How did it go?" he asked as Elena approached. "I got my life back," Elena replied simply. Dave smiled, the expression transforming his weathered features. "I'm glad. You deserve better than what you had here." Elena looked around the shooting range that had been her refuge for 8 months. "This place saved me. You saved me. I won't forget that." "You don't need saving anymore," Dave observed. "You need to remember who you are and get back to doing what you were born to do." Elena spent her final evening in Millbrook, packing the few possessions that mattered to her. The anonymous furniture could stay, the generic decorations could be left behind. But the small wooden box hidden beneath the floorboards came with her. Inside the box were the items she'd been unable to throw away when she'd created Elena Vasquez, Danny's last letter to his family, a photograph of their sniper team taken after a successful mission, her Marine Corps' Good Conduct Medal, and a brass casing from the rifle round that had eliminated the high-value target during Operation Nightfall. Elena held the brass casing up to the light, remembering the moment when everything changed. For 8 months, she'd seen that shot as the mistake that killed Danny. Now she understood it as the action that saved an entire assault team and eliminated a terrorist leader responsible for countless deaths. Danny had been right to support the shot. Elena had been right to take it. The only mistake had been believing Colonel Webb's lies about what had really happened. Elena packed the brass casing carefully in her luggage, along with the other mementos of her real identity. Tomorrow she would begin the journey back to Camp Pendleton, back to the Marine Corps, back to being the person she was meant to be. Gunnery Sergeant Maria Santos had work to do. 3 weeks later, Maria Santos stood at the entrance to the Marine Corps Scout Sniper School at Camp Pendleton, wearing the dress blue uniform she hadn't touched in 8 months. The Southern California morning was crisp and clear, with the kind of perfect visibility that snipers dreamed about. The ribbons on her chest told a different story. Now the Silver Star had been replaced with the Navy Cross, and a new decoration she'd never expected to wear gleamed beside it, the Bronze Star with V device for her actions during Operation Nightfall. The ceremony to officially restore her to active duty had been held the previous day, in a small auditorium filled with Marines who had fought to uncover the truth about her case. Captain Mitchell had been there, along with Lieutenant Colonel Bradley and Major Hendricks. Jackson Walsh had attended in civilian clothes, his presence a quiet reminder of the friendship that had made her redemption possible. But the moment that had meant the most to Maria was when Danny's parents had approached her after the ceremony. Tom and Linda Reeves had driven from Ohio to be present, carrying with them a letter their son had written but never sent a letter, recommending Maria for promotion and praising her as the finest sniper he'd ever worked with. "Danny talked about you in every letter he sent home," Linda Reeves had told Maria through her tears. "He said you were going to change how the Marine Corps thinks about precision shooting. He said you were going to save lives." Now standing outside the Scout Sniper School, Maria felt the weight of that expectation and the opportunity to fulfill it. The school's mission was to train Marine snipers to the highest standards of marksmanship, fieldcraft, and tactical expertise. As the senior instructor, Maria would be responsible for developing the curriculum, evaluating students, and ensuring that every Marine who graduated was prepared for the realities of combat. The commanding officer of the school was Colonel James Morrison, a soft-spoken professional with 30 years of infantry experience and a reputation for innovative training methods. He greeted Maria in his office, which was decorated with photographs of previous sniper school classes and awards recognizing the program's excellence. "Gunnery Sergeant Santos," Colonel Morrison said, extending his hand. "Welcome to the Scout Sniper School. I've been looking forward to working with you." Maria accepted the handshake, noting the firm grip and direct eye contact that marked Morrison as someone who judged people by their actions rather than their reputation. "Thank you, sir. I'm ready to get to work," Morrison smiled. "Good, because we have 43 students in the current class, and they're about to begin the most challenging phase of their training. They could benefit from an instructor who understands what it's like to apply these skills in actual combat." Over the following weeks, Maria threw herself into the work of teaching with the same intensity she'd once brought to combat operations. The students in her classes were experienced Marines, mostly infantry and reconnaissance personnel who had already proven themselves in basic military skills. But sniper training demanded a different level of precision, patience, and mental discipline. Maria's teaching style was direct and practical, focusing on the real-world applications of marksmanship skills rather than theoretical perfection. She shared stories from her deployments, carefully edited to protect operational security, that illustrated the importance of fieldcraft, camouflage, and tactical decision-making. The most important skill a sniper can develop isn't the ability to make a perfect shot, Maria told her students during one of her first lectures. It's the ability to make the right decision about when not to shoot. Every shot you take in combat has consequences that extend far beyond the target. The students responded to her authenticity and expertise with the kind of respect that couldn't be manufactured or demanded. They recognized that Gunnery Sergeant Santos had done everything she was asking them to do, had faced the same challenges they would encounter, and had succeeded under conditions they could barely imagine. One of Maria's first major initiatives was to revise the school's curriculum to include more emphasis on decision-making under pressure. Traditional sniper training focused heavily on marksmanship and technical skills, but Maria believed that the psychological aspects of precision shooting were equally important. Combat shooting isn't about perfect conditions and unlimited time to prepare, she explained to Colonel Morrison during one of their weekly planning meetings. It's about making accurate shots when you're tired, scared, and operating with incomplete information. We need to train our students to manage those stressors. Morrison approved the curriculum changes, and within a month, the Scout Sniper School had implemented new training scenarios that replicated the chaos and pressure of actual combat situations. Students were required to make shooting decisions while dealing with simulated time pressure, conflicting information, and ethical dilemmas. The changes were controversial among some of the veteran instructors, who preferred the traditional focus on technical marksmanship. But the results spoke for themselves. Students who completed Maria's enhanced program demonstrated better decision-making skills and improved performance in field exercises. 6 months into her assignment, Maria received a visit from an unexpected source. Master Sergeant Robert Chun, who had been Danny's team leader during Operation Nightfall, arrived at Camp Pendleton to discuss something he described as unfinished business. Chun was a compact, intense Marine with the kind of quiet authority that came from years of leading men in combat. He'd been decorated for his actions during Operation Nightfall, but Maria could see that the mission's aftermath had left its mark on him as well. "Gunnery Sergeant," Chun said as they met in Maria's office, "I need to tell you something I should have said 8 months ago." Maria gestured for him to take a seat, noting the tension in his posture. "I knew the investigation into your case was bullshit," Chun continued. "I was there, I heard Corporal Reeves' communications, I saw what actually happened. But I was told to keep my mouth shut because speaking out would compromise other ongoing operations." Maria felt a familiar tightness in her chest. "Why are yodeling?" "Me this now?" Maria asked. Chun's jaw tightened. "Because I just found out that 2 Marines from my unit died last month in Afghanistan. Good kids, both of them. They died because they didn't have the kind of advanced training that you're providing here. Training that could have been developed months ago if you hadn't been railroaded out of the corps." Maria studied Chun's face, seeing the guilt and regret that she recognized from her own mirror. "Master Sergeant, what happened to those Marines wasn't your fault, wasn't it?" Chun challenged. "I let them destroy the career of the best sniper instructor the Corps had, and now Marines are dying who might have lived if they'd had better training." Chun reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. "I've been collecting testimonials from every Marine who served with you, every officer who witnessed your capabilities, every sniper who learned from your expertise. I want to submit this to Marine Corps headquarters as part of a recommendation for your promotion to Master Sergeant." Maria opened the folder and began reading. Page after page of written statements from Marines she'd served with, describing her as exceptional, professional, and inspirational. Combat veterans who credited her with saving their lives, junior Marines who described her mentorship as transformational, senior officers who praised her tactical innovation and leadership abilities. "This is..." Maria's voice caught as she read. A statement from a young lance corporal she'd barely remembered meeting. "This is incredible." "It's the truth," Chun said simply. "You changed lives, Maria. You made the Marines around you better at their jobs, better at staying alive. That's a legacy worth preserving." Over the following months, Chun's campaign for Maria's recognition gained momentum throughout the Marine Corps sniper community. The testimonials he'd collected were supplemented by additional statements from Marines who had heard about Maria's return to active duty and wanted to contribute their own stories. The most powerful testimonial came from an unexpected source, Captain Jennifer Walsh, a Marine Corps intelligence officer who had been wounded during Operation Nightfall and whose life had been saved by Maria's precision shooting. "I was pinned down in the compound when enemy fighters began to overrun our position. Captain Walsh wrote. Staff Sergeant Santos eliminated 3 enemy combatants who had clear shots at my location. Her actions under fire were the difference between my coming home to my family and dying in a foreign desert. She is the epitome of what a Marine should be. The recommendation for Maria's promotion was submitted through official channels, but it was also accompanied by something unprecedented: a petition signed by over 200 active duty and veteran Marines, requesting that she be assigned to develop a new advanced sniper training program for the entire Marine Corps. The response from Marine Corps headquarters was swift and decisive. Not only was Maria promoted to Master Sergeant, but she was also assigned to lead the development of the Marine Corps Advanced Marksmanship Program, a comprehensive training initiative designed to improve shooting skills across all military occupational specialties. The new assignment meant leaving the Scout Sniper School, but Maria embraced the opportunity to impact Marine training on a broader scale. Her program would eventually train thousands of Marines, improving their survival rates and combat effectiveness in ways that could be measured in lives saved and missions accomplished. 2 years after her return to active duty, Maria stood before a congressional subcommittee examining military training and readiness. She was there to testify about the Advanced Marksmanship Program and its impact on Marine Corps capabilities. In the past 18 months, Maria told the assembled representatives and senators, Marines who completed our advanced training program have demonstrated a 40% improvement in combat, shooting accuracy, and a 60% reduction in ammunition expenditure during firefights. More importantly, units with program graduates have experienced a 25% reduction in combat casualties. The statistics were impressive, but Maria knew that behind each number was a Marine who had come home to their family because they'd been better prepared for combat. Young men and women who were alive because someone had taken the time to teach them how to shoot accurately under pressure. After her testimony, Maria was approached by Representative Sarah Martinez, a former Army officer who served on the House Armed Services Committee. Master Sergeant Santos, Representative Martinez said, "Your story has been an inspiration to many of us who believe in accountability and justice within the military system. Have you considered what you might want to do after your military career?" Maria smiled. "With respect, ma'am, I haven't thought about leaving the Marines. This is where I belong." "I understand," Martinez replied. "But if you ever change your mind, there are opportunities in civilian law enforcement training, private security, and even politics for someone with your expertise and moral courage." Maria thanked the representative but dismissed the suggestion. The Marine Corps had wronged her, but it had also redeemed itself through the actions of Marines like Captain Mitchell, Lieutenant Colonel Bradley, and Master Sergeant Chun. The institution was imperfect, but it was also capable of growth and self-correction. 5 years after her return to active duty, Maria was promoted to Sergeant Major and assigned as the Senior Enlisted Advisor for Marine Corps Training and Education. It was the highest position she could achieve without becoming a commissioned officer, and it gave her influence over every aspect of how Marines were prepared for their duties. By then, her advanced marksmanship program had been adopted by other branches of the military and even by allied nations. Marines trained under her curriculum were serving in conflicts around the world, applying skills that could trace their lineage back to lessons learned during Operation Nightfall. Jackson Walsh, now a civilian contractor specializing in military training development, visited Maria at Marine Corps Base Quantico on the 10th anniversary of Danny Reeves' death. "Do you ever wonder what Danny would think of all this?" Walsh asked as they walked through the training facilities Maria had helped design. Maria considered the question carefully. "I think he'd be proud of the Marines we're turning out, but I think he'd be more interested in the fact that we're preventing other Marines from going through what we experienced." Walsh nodded. "He always said the mission wasn't about individual glory, it was about getting everyone home safely." That evening, Maria attended a memorial service at the Marine Corps' War Memorial, where Danny's name had been added to a wall honoring Marines killed in action. She placed a small American flag beneath his name and stood in silence for several minutes. "I kept my promise," she whispered to the engraved letters. "I'm training the next generation. They're better prepared because of what we learned together." As Maria walked away from the memorial, she reflected on the journey that had brought her from Staff Sergeant Maria Santos to Elena Vasquez and back to Sergeant Major Santos. The pain of Danny's death would never completely fade, but it had been transformed into something productive, a drive to ensure that other Marines were better prepared for the challenges they would face. The brass casing from Operation Nightfall still sat on Maria's desk at Quantico, now serving as a paperweight for training documents and curriculum proposals. Visitors often asked about its significance, and Maria would tell them it represented the most important lesson she'd learned as a PAVA Marine, that every action in combat has consequences that extend far beyond the immediate moment. Colonel Webb had been sentenced to 15 years in military prison for his crimes, but Maria rarely thought about him anymore. His betrayal had caused immense pain, but it had also led to reforms in how the Marine Corps handled investigations and evidence. Future Marines would be protected by procedures that hadn't existed during her case. 10 years after her return to active duty, Maria retired from the Marine Corps with 30 years of service. Her retirement ceremony was attended by hundreds of Marines whose lives had been touched by her training programs, including many who credited her instruction with saving their lives in combat. The ceremony's most emotional moment came when a young corporal named Rodriguez approached Maria during the reception. "Sergeant Major," Rodriguez said, "I wanted to thank you personally. I used the shooting techniques you developed during my deployment to Syria. Your training saved my life and the lives of my team members." Maria smiled and shook the young Marine's hand. "That's what we do, Corporal. We prepare each other for the challenges ahead." After retirement, Maria accepted a position as Director of Training Development for the Marine Corps Association, where she continued to work on improving military education and readiness. She also began writing a book about leadership under pressure, drawing on her experiences in combat and her years as an instructor. The book, titled Precision Under Pressure: Leadership Lessons from the Front Lines, became required reading at military academies and leadership schools. In it, Maria wrote about the importance of moral courage, the value of accepting responsibility for mistakes, and the power of institutions to both harm and heal. Jackson Walsh, now a successful author and consultant, wrote the book's foreword. Maria Santos represents the best of what military service can produce, a warrior who combines exceptional technical skill with unwavering moral courage. Her story reminds us that individual excellence means nothing without institutional integrity, and that true leadership sometimes requires fighting for what's right, even when the cost is everything you've worked to achieve. On quiet evenings, at her home in Virginia, Maria would sometimes take out the wooden box that had traveled with her from Elena Vasquez's apartment to her retirement. The items inside: Danny's letter, the team photograph, her decorations, and the brass casing from Operation Nightfall served as reminders of a journey that had taken her from the depths of despair to a life of purpose and meaning. Maria's story had become legend within the Marine Corps, told to new recruits as an example of how the Corps takes care of its own and how truth ultimately prevails over injustice. But for Maria herself, the story's real meaning was simpler. It was about the power of friendship, the importance of fighting for what's right, and the possibility of redemption even in the darkest circumstances. The last entry in Maria's military journal, written on the day of her retirement, read simply, "Mission accomplished. Marines trained, lives saved, promises kept." Danny would be proud. In the end, that was the only recognition that truly mattered. 20 years after Operation Nightfall, The Marine Corps Scout Sniper School was renamed the Santos Center for Advanced Marksmanship, honoring Maria's contributions to military training and development. A bronze plaque at the entrance quoted her most famous statement to new instructors: "We don't train Marines to be perfect shots. We train them to make the right decisions when perfection isn't possible." Maria attended the dedication ceremony, now a civilian but still carrying herself with the bearing of someone who had served with honor. As she unveiled the plaque bearing her name, she thought about the young woman who had once cleaned floors at a Colorado shooting range, believing her life was over. That woman had been wrong. Sometimes the end of one story is just the beginning of another. Better one. And sometimes the most important victories are the ones that save the people who come after us. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel.